He walked with a limp that no one noticed, because no one was looking. Not in that dusty roadside diner just off the highway where the coffee was cheap and the silence only broke when engines passed outside. His jacket was faded navy blue, his steps slow but steady, and his back just slightly bent, not from age, but from carrying years no one else had lived. He wasn't there to be seen. He came in quietly, nodded to the waitress, and sat at the booth by the window. Same seat, same meal, every week. On his jacket, a small patch with an anchor, and on his cap, a gold-stitched word that once meant something. Navy. But not today, because today, no one saluted, no one thanked him, no one even looked up, except them. 3 bikers spread across the counter like they owned the place, loud, greasy, restless, the kind of men who never outgrew high school. They just bought louder machines. They weren't there for food, they were there for attention. And when the old man walked in, wearing that cap, moving like time itself had left its mark, they saw what they came for. Something to mock, something weaker, something easy. It started with a whisper, a smirk. The first one leaned over and muttered loud enough for his friends to hear, "Hey, look, the War Museum sent a representative." They laughed. The waitress didn't, but she didn't say anything either. No one did. Not the couple in the corner booth, not the cashier, not the cook in the back. The old man heard it, but he didn't turn. He just sat quietly, eyes on the menu like he hadn't memorized it years ago. The second biker joined in, louder. "What's that on your jacket, Grandpa? Medals for most naps during battle?" More laughter, no reaction. The old man folded his hands, steady, unshaken. But his eyes, they darkened, just for a second. He had heard worse in war. He had survived worse in silence, but today hurt differently, because it wasn't bullets. It was disrespect. That was the moment a man in the back booth looked up. He hadn't moved when the bikers laughed, hadn't spoken when the insults started. But now, he raised his head. He wore a plain black jacket, no patches, no signs, no name, but his face, recognizable. To anyone who had ever watched justice happen without a word. Jason Statham. He didn't stand, not yet. But his fingers, resting on the table, curled slowly into a fist. Not in anger, in awareness. Because Jason had seen this moment before. Not in movies, in real life. The type of moment where good people stay seated, and the wrong ones grow louder. Back at the counter, the bikers had moved on to a new joke. This time about how long it would take the old man to finish his eggs. He didn't touch them, he didn't answer, but his hand trembled. Just once. Then stopped. Jason saw it, and that was enough. He placed a few bills on the table, stood slowly and walked toward the front. Not with speed, with certainty. The third biker noticed him first, eyed him from the side. Oh, here comes Mr. Tough Guy. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't even look at them. He walked past their table and toward the register, but just before reaching it, he paused. One small step, one glance, and everything in the room changed, because some men don't need to speak to be heard. They just need to look. The laughter faltered. The second biker's grin faded. Jason's eyes locked onto the cap resting on the table beside the old man's plate. It had been taken, set aside, disrespected. Jason turned, not fast, but the way a storm turns, slowly, with certainty. And behind him, the old man finally looked up, just once, straight at Jason. And in that look, there was a message. "I don't need you to fight for me, but I'm tired of standing alone." Jason took one step back toward the bikers. The diner fell silent. No music, no clinking of plates, no whispers, just the sound of one man reclaiming the space around him. The first biker stood, towering, smug. "You lost, old man," he said, but the words didn't matter. Jason wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the navy cap. Slowly, he picked it up, dusted it off, and placed it back on the veteran's head. That's when the diner knew something unforgettable was about to happen. Jason didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't widen his stance. He didn't threaten. He simply stood, and that was enough. The first biker, tall and thick-chested, stepped forward. He wore a leather vest patched with meaningless symbols. He had a scar on his cheek and a crooked smile that had probably worked in places where intimidation came cheap. But here, it meant nothing, because Jason didn't flinch. He picked up the navy cap, shook off the dust, and gently placed it back on the veteran's head, 2 fingers steady, respectful. The old man didn't speak, but his eyes glistened, just barely. Jason turned to face the biker. 1 second, 2, then a step closer. The air changed. The first biker tried to laugh it off. "You got a problem, pal?" Jason said nothing. He just looked through him, not at him. The second biker stood, confused. The third stayed seated, pretending to check his phone, his fingers trembling. Jason didn't take a fighting stance. He didn't crack his knuckles. He let the silence speak. And the silence grew unbearable. Because the loudest men in the room always fear one thing: a man who doesn't need noise to be heard. Jason looked down at the table where their plates were half finished, then up, slowly, locking eyes with each one of them. The first biker huffed. "Old man can't fight his own battles now." Still, no answer. Jason simply shifted his weight. Barely a move. But trained men know some motions don't telegraph attack, they promise it. And that's when it happened. The first biker lunged, not with control, with anger. A wild punch aimed at Jason's chest, but it never landed. Jason sidestepped, grabbed the wrist midair, twisted gently, and used the biker's own momentum to send him crashing down beside the jukebox. The diner gasped, not in violence, in disbelief. It had taken less than a second. The second biker charged, swinging a chair. Jason ducked low, swept his leg, and the man flipped backward, landing hard, wind knocked out. The third biker froze. He looked around, at his friends on the ground, at Jason, at the old man now watching from the booth with a calm, knowing expression. He stood slowly, hands up, backed away. Jason didn't chase him, didn't say a word. The biker left the diner in silence, and his fallen friends followed, limping, humiliated. Jason turned back to the counter. He grabbed a glass of water and placed it gently in front of the veteran, then nodded, respectfully. The man lifted the cup with both hands. His fingers still shook, but this time from relief. He looked up at Jason and smiled. Jason returned the nod and turned to leave, but before he could reach the door, the entire diner stood. Not one person sat, not because of Jason, because of the man in the booth, the one they had ignored, dismissed, watched be humiliated without lifting a finger, until Jason reminded them who he was: a veteran, a protector, a survivor, and now, finally, seen. As Jason stepped into the parking lot, the air was cooler, quieter. But at the edge of the lot, someone leaned against a black motorcycle, different from the others. Leather jacket, sharp eyes, a veteran of a different war, one fought with fists and shadows. He wasn't smiling. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Jason didn't stop walking, but he knew this wasn't over yet. The sun dipped low over the parking lot, casting long shadows across the concrete. The air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline, the kind of scent that clings to places where trouble waits in silence. The man leaning against the black motorcycle didn't look like the others. No patches, no loud colors, no fake toughness. His jacket was clean, his posture loose, too loose for someone untrained. And that's how Jason knew. This one wasn't a clown. He was the kind who didn't talk during fights because he didn't need to. Jason stopped 5 feet from him. The man tilted his head. "You made us look weak in there." Jason stayed quiet. "I don't care about them," the man continued, "but now I have to respond because everyone in there saw it." He stepped off the bike slowly, and Jason noticed it, his stance, his balance, the way his boots never lost contact with the pavement. He wasn't just some gang leader, he was trained. The man raised an eyebrow. "You still want to play the hero?" Jason took a step forward, not to threaten, to give him a chance. One last one, but it wasn't taken. The man struck fast, clean. A direct jab followed by a hook meant to drop anyone without warning. Jason moved like water. He ducked the jab, blocked the hook with a raised forearm, and struck low, not with anger, but with intention. A single hit to the ribs, not to injure, to take the breath. The man staggered back, surprised. Jason didn't advance. He waited, let the man choose. Fight again, or listen. But pride is deaf. The man lunged. Jason sidestepped, pivoted, and swept the leg from under him in one seamless motion. The man hit the pavement hard, air gone, ego shattered. But Jason didn't move, didn't celebrate. He crouched, met the man's eyes, and whispered something only he could hear. Whatever it was, the man didn't respond. He stayed down, because something inside him finally understood. This wasn't about dominance. This was about correction. Jason stood, turned, and the man didn't follow. Back inside the diner, the old Navy veteran was still seated at his booth, now joined by a young waitress and an elderly couple. They weren't talking, they were listening. The veteran spoke softly, probably for the first time in years. Stories, names, places. Not for sympathy, for memory, for legacy. Jason didn't go back inside. He walked to his car, started the engine, but he looked once more through the windshield and saw what mattered. The old man wasn't alone anymore. He was surrounded, seen, heard, respected. That night, Jason parked outside a rundown bar on the edge of town. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to return something, a medal, once stolen from the veteran by that same gang years before. He slid it across the counter to a man who had held onto it for the wrong reasons. "Give this back," Jason said. And before the man could speak, Jason was already gone. The morning came quietly, as it often does in small towns where most stories fade before they're told. But not today, because today, someone was finally ready to speak. The diner opened early, as always. Coffee brewing, chairs being unstacked. Same rhythm, same light. But at booth 6, something was different. Arthur, the old man in the navy cap, sat straighter. His eyes were sharper, and in front of him, wrapped in a cloth too clean for coincidence, sat a medal. Polished, heavy, untouched for years. Jason had returned it without fanfare. No speech, no ceremony, just placed it on the counter before disappearing through the door. The waitress didn't know what it was. Arthur did. It was the one they'd stolen. Years ago. A group of bikers who didn't understand the meaning behind the ribbon, who wore disrespect like perfume and took anything that made them feel powerful. They had ripped it from his coat, laughed, thrown it in the trash. But one of them had kept it as a trophy. Jason had found it and brought it back. Arthur didn't ask how. He just stared at it, hands trembling, because that medal wasn't about glory. It was about a moment. A single night in 1969 when Arthur had crawled through mud and shrapnel to pull 3 wounded men out of an ambush. He had carried them through fire, through fear, through something he never spoke of again. That medal was for them. And now, it was back. Word spread quickly. By noon, the diner was full. Not just with customers, with silence. Everyone had heard. Some had seen the fight. Some had seen Jason. But now they were seeing Arthur for who he truly was. A man who had carried the weight of service through a world that no longer saluted. Jason didn't return that day. He didn't need to. His work was never about being seen. It was about restoring what should have never been taken. That afternoon, Logan, one of the younger cooks, walked from the kitchen, removed his apron and sat across from Arthur. He didn't ask questions. He just listened. Arthur spoke for an hour. Names, places, faces. And by the end of it, Logan stood, shook his hand, and left quietly. Not out of awkwardness, out of respect. Later that evening, Jason received a letter. No stamp, no return address. Just folded once and slipped under his door. Inside, for the first time in 12 years, I wore my uniform again. Thank you for reminding them, and me, that it still means something. Signed, Arthur L. Bennett. Ret. U.S. Navy. Senior Chief Jason read it once, folded it, and placed it next to something else. His own medal, unworn, unspoken of, but not forgotten, because sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest stories. That night, as Jason stood outside his home under the porch light, an engine roared in the distance. Not one, three, the same bikes, but something was different. The men dismounted, not with threats, but with helmets in hand, and heads slightly bowed. One of them extended a hand, holding something wrapped in cloth. "We didn't know who he was," he said. "We didn't know who yous were either." Jason stared, then opened the cloth. Inside, another medal, one Arthur thought was gone forever. The cloth was heavy in Jason's hands, not because of weight, because of what was inside. He unfolded it slowly. The medal inside was old, scratched, dulled by time, but unmistakable. A bronze star, once pinned to the chest of a man who never spoke about why he received it. Arthur. Jason looked up at the bikers standing before him. Their faces were different now. No arrogance, no swagger, just the quiet discomfort of men who had been forced to see themselves and hadn't liked what they saw. "We took it a long time ago," one of them said. "Didn't know who he was. Just thought it was funny." Jason didn't speak. He didn't need to. He nodded once, then turned and walked back into the house, not slamming the door, just closing it. Inside, he placed the medal on the table next to the letter Arthur had written, and slowly he sat down. There were few people in the world Jason Statham had ever owed anything to, but Arthur Bennett was one of them. Because years ago, before the films, before the headlines, before anyone knew his name, Jason had been nothing more than a kid in uniform trying to survive a war in a country whose name he couldn't pronounce. He had been injured, alone, pinned under the debris of an ambush gone wrong, and it was Arthur who found him. Arthur, who dragged him out of the wreckage, tied off the bleeding, carried him across open fire, and never said a word about it again. Jason hadn't even known his name then. Just a pair of calm eyes behind a weathered face, a grip like iron, and a voice that only said one thing: stay awake. He had, and because of that, he was alive. Jason never forgot, but Arthur had, or maybe he'd chosen to. Because real heroes don't talk, they act, and then they go home. Now, decades later, Jason had returned the favor, not to pay back a debt, but to make sure the world remembered the man who had saved him before it was too late. The next day, Jason visited the diner again. This time, the atmosphere was different. People looked up when he entered. Heads nodded, eyes lingered with a mix of respect and quiet thanks. Arthur was seated at his usual table, but this time, he wasn't alone. 2 young Marines had joined him, local kids who had never known his name before that week. Now, They listened like disciples. Jason approached slowly. Arthur looked up. Their eyes met. No handshake, no salute. Just that same quiet stare from decades earlier. And Jason finally spoke, not to the Marines, to the man who had once carried him through fire. "You saved my life once." Arthur smiled faintly. "And now they know." Jason nodded. That was all. Then he turned to leave, but Arthur said one more thing. "You gave me back something I lost. Not the medal, the meaning." Jason paused and walked out into the daylight. That night, Jason sat alone in his garage, surrounded by old gear and silent memories. He opened a box sealed for years. Inside, his original uniform and a letter from his commanding officer. He never read it until now. It said, "He pulled you out with a bullet in his shoulder. He didn't wait for backup, he just moved. If you ever find him, thank him." Jason folded the letter, then looked at the medal on the table. One more thing still needed to be done. It wasn't in the papers. There were no cameras, no hashtags, no press, just a folded flag, a row of chairs behind a diner, and a name, printed on a simple wooden plaque. Arthur L. Bennett, U.S. Navy, 1966-1989. He wasn't dead, but Jason knew some men deserve their recognition. Before and they're gone. So he made it happen. No ceremony, just truth. The diner had closed early. By sunset, the lot had been cleared. Tables were arranged. Chairs in rows. Not many, just enough for the people who mattered. And they came. Some in uniform, some in denim, some in silence. Logan came. The waitress came. Even the bikers came. Without their vests, without their engines, without their pride. Arthur walked out from the back door of the diner escorted by two young Marines, unsure of what was happening, until he saw the flag, until he saw the chair at the front, empty, waiting, until he saw Jason. Jason stood beside the chair, hands behind his back, and for the first time that anyone could remember, he spoke. Not loud, but clear. This man saved lives. He didn't list battles. He didn't list ranks. He listed moments. Moments when Arthur said nothing and acted anyway. Moments when others ran, and he stayed. Moments that would have been forgotten unless someone stood up and made sure they were not. Then Jason stepped aside. Arthur was asked to sit. He didn't want to, but Jason nodded once, and the entire crowd, the entire parking lot, stood. Not in applause, in silence, because sometimes respect doesn't make noise. It simply rises. Jason stepped to the table beside the chair and placed down two things: the medal they had taken from Arthur, and a framed photo of a younger man being pulled from the rubble of a collapsed convoy, barely alive. In the photo, you couldn't see Arthur's face, just his arms, just the strength, just the sacrifice. Jason looked at him now, years later, bent slightly with age but no less strong, and finally said what he had carried for decades. "You saved me." Arthur said nothing, but his eyes were full. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes. No speeches, no applause, just truth. Afterward, people approached Arthur slowly, thanked him, some for his service, some for his story, others just for showing up. Jason didn't linger. He watched from a distance, and when it was done, he turned to leave. But Arthur called to him softly. Jason turned. Arthur stood now, alone. He walked toward Jason, slow but sure, and extended something small in his hand. A pin from his old uniform. Jason looked at it, then at Arthur. He shook his head, almost refusing, but Arthur closed his hand around Jason's. "This belongs to you too." Jason accepted it, not as a gift, as a reminder of the weight some men carry and the silence others must break. That night, Jason returned home and opened the drawer one final time. Inside were medals, letters, memories. He placed the pin gently beside them. and closed it for good. Not because the story was over, because now the world knew it. They mocked his cap, they laughed at his walk, they tried to humiliate what they didn't understand. But Jason Statham didn't stand up to prove anything. He stood up because some men shouldn't have to. He didn't fight for recognition. He fought to return it. And when the world tried to forget a Navy hero, Jason made sure they never would. If this story reminded you of someone you love, if you believe veterans deserve more than silence, subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to remember what real respect looks like. Leave the name of a veteran in the comments. We read them, we honor them, we remember them, because you don't touch a veteran, you stand for him.